Good evening, everyone, and welcome along tonight to the Scottish Parliament. I'm Elaine Smith, and as Deputy Presiding Officer of the Parliament, I'm delighted that I'm going to be your host for this evening's event, The Talent of Our Young People. To discuss the issues, I am joined by an excellent panel of guests, and I would just like to take a few minutes to introduce them to you. Directly on my left, we have Joan Parr from Creative Scotland. Joan's portfolio includes education, learning and young people, and she joined Creative Scotland after holding the position of Head of Education for the Scottish Arts Council for 5 years, before which she was an education officer. She's held previous positions in embassies in West Africa and the Middle East, as well as a year in Mumbai and the Punjab. And she's worked as education officer at the National Galleries of Scotland. She was the first education officer at Edinburgh Castle, and she was education officer for Heritage, Visual and Performing Arts at Falkirk Council. So that's Joan Parr. Next to Joan is Ricky Ross, who is lead singer and songwriter for Deacon Blue. The band have made 5 studio albums and will soon release their first record of new work for over 10 years. So that's very exciting. And Ricky has also released 4 solo albums, and he's one half of Macintosh Ross, with his wife Lorraine being the other half. He's written songs with and for a wide number of artists, and Ricky also presents Another Country and Sunday Morning for BBC Radio Scotland, as well as hosting occasional programmes for Radio 2. Next to Ricky is Vicky Featherstone, who is the Artistic Director and Chief Executive of the National Theatre of Scotland, for whom she has directed many productions. Vicky was the Artistic Director of the Paynes Plough Theatre Company before taking up this post, and with them she toured extensively across Britain and internationally, garnering many awards for her work as a director and also a reputation for discovering and developing the best writing talent. Before that, she worked in television as a drama executive for the BBC, Granada TV and Central TV. Beside Vicky, we have Siobhan Miller, who is a Radio 2 Young Folk Award winner, and Siobhan is from Pennycook in Midlothian. She first appeared at the TMSA Auchtermuchty Festival when she was only 13 years old, and she won both the children's and the women's singing competitions. She's sung at festivals and concerts all over Britain and in several European countries, winning competitions and awards including Scots Singer of the Year at the MG Alba Scottish Trad Music Awards 2012 and the BBC Radio 2 Young Folk Award 2008 with Orkney's Gina Leslie. More recently, she's performed on Broadway as resident singer in the Mabou Mines production of Peter and Wendy. Siobhan. And last but not least is David Drever, who I think some of you know, judging by the eye contact when David came in. And he's currently the convener of the General Teaching Council of Scotland, the regulatory body for the Scottish teaching profession. And as is the tradition in the Chamber, I really should declare an interest at this point because I'm also a member of the GTC. David was elected as a practising teacher. He's taught in a number of schools in Glasgow and is currently Deputy Head Teacher in Kirkwall Grammar School. He's been actively engaged with all aspects of Scottish education throughout his career, and as a past president of the EIS has spoken on behalf of teachers throughout the world. He's an English teacher to trade, and he has anthologised and published on the teaching of Scottish literature, and more recently he's written a short critical survey of the literature of Orkney. So we're going to set the scene now, and after that, later on, there'll be an opportunity for the members of the audience to put questions and views to the panel. So firstly, I'd like to give each of our panellists a few minutes to talk about what part they believe young people can play in the creativity and culture of this country, or whatever else they wish to talk about at this point. I'm going to start with Joan.
Okay, thank you. I thought I would probably start with talking a bit about these words, because creativity and culture can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, and there are a lot of international discussions going on around the world at the moment, people trying to grapple with this idea of what is creativity, which is interesting in itself, because I do think it's a notion, an idea whose time has come. We can come back to that and talk about that more. But I think because of the economic, political, social situations, the speed the world's changing at now, I think creativity is increasingly seen as important. But what is it? What is this thing that we're talking about? So I can't claim to give you the definitive answer, but there is a very nice, succinct definition of creativity that I like, which is: imagination is the capacity for original thought, and creativity is applied imagination. And that kind of encapsulates it for me. I didn't make that up, by the way. That was Ken Robinson, who some of you may have heard, absolutely fantastic speaker on this subject. And I think if you Google his TED Talk, I think it is the most watched, most listened to TED Talk that there is. It's well worth listening to. We had him over in Glasgow, I think it was last year, and he wowed everybody again. He's just fantastic to listen to. So that's a sort of succinct definition of creativity. I think it's also worth thinking of it in terms of it's a skill set. It isn't one thing, it's a skill set. And we're still in the process of kind of ironing out or agreeing what those skills are, or what's the definitive skill set. But there are things like observational skills, risk-taking, resilience, divergent thinking, open to new ideas, challenging of assumptions. All these things are part of the skill set. And just one last thing on the creativity word, which I at least found interesting, is it wasn't until the Scottish Enlightenment that creativity as a notion was applied to human beings. Before that, it was something divine. It was something God was the creator. As you know, in the Bible, he created heaven and earth, and that was it was a divine attribute. Human beings couldn't aspire to that. And of course, it was with the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason and all that the power of religion declining, that then creativity began to be thought of as something that human beings could also do. So put creativity to one side. We'll go to culture now. And I know there's been a lot of talk about the interrelationship between culture and identity, and really they are almost interchangeable. I think culture is who we are. It's who we are, whoever we are. It is the sort of defining norms, characteristics, behaviours of any given community. That's what your culture is. Even if it's sitting watching reality TV on a sofa for 24 hours a day, that's what your culture is. So you've got culture, you are part of a culture, whether you like it or not. That's one way of looking at culture. Then there's the sort of the collectivity of human intellectual and artistic endeavour. That's where the professional arts come in, which most of these people are here. They are the sort of high-end professional end of culture and the arts. And there's one more that I'd just like to mention, which is really more of a scientific definition. But if you think of culture in terms of, growing cultures and agriculture, if you think of those kind of words, the definition there for culture is the medium in which we grow, which I think is also interesting in terms of the arts. I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Joan. Can I now ask Ricky to help us set the scene?
Thanks, Elaine. Well, I'm ancient, so first of all, I don't really remember being at school. And so two things that I really wanted to say. One was really about education, and one was what it feels like to be a musician, because it's a question I get asked a lot. So very quickly, too old to remember being at school, but what I do remember is, I was recalling this with two of my fellow panellists, teaching for a short time. And one of the things that I remember very clearly, and it relates a lot to being a musician, is the people that I knew when I was teaching for a very, very short time in Glasgow and Maryhill were kids that were inspired by music teachers at the school that I taught in. Now, when I say inspired, sometimes that meant that instead of being out in the playground and getting a doing, they were in the music room making music. And two of these guys that I met at that time, this is about 30 years ago, ended up being in a band that I met on tour later on in the States. They were signed to a record label and so on. So it was very real. It was, they made music at lunchtime to maybe escape not very nice things going on in the playground. The music room was a sanctuary. There was a drum kit. There was instruments there that they could use. And they ended up becoming musicians, which I think was great. But also, there was a sense in which they were allowed, they were given responsibility, and I think that was a great thing. The other thing I should say is that I am a parent of 4 children who've had various degrees of inspiring people teaching them. My eldest daughter had a drama teacher who really inspired her. She didn't do drama, she just did drama at school, but she absolutely loved it. I have another daughter who was in a choir at school, and a choir master who asked them to do things they would never have got together themselves. They were far too ambitious, probably, but that was brilliant because it challenged them to do things they really themselves wouldn't have come up with. And my youngest child, my little boy, had a primary school teacher who himself was a musician, who just inspired him by his love of music. And all these people have had amazing experiences at school. So I think what can happen to people at school is really positive. So that's a very positive thing. But here's a question that I get asked all the time, simply because at the moment I'm doing lots of interviews, because I'm old. I'm doing a retrospective on 25 years of music, and we're about to release our little catalogue, so you're being asked to remember things. And the question I get asked a lot is, how much has the music industry changed? And so how does it feel to be a musician in Scotland compared to 25 years ago? That's the question. And I have to answer that I think it's much, much harder for young musicians these days. Now, Siobhan will give you an understanding of this from her perspective, different, because she's a folk musician, and we were kind of wanting to be in a pop group and in a rock and roll group and make records and all that kind of thing. I would say in our time it was very hard, but it's much harder now. And the disappointment for me is that I still think if you're young and you're Scottish, it's not within Scotland where that decision is made. You still have to go to London. You still have to go to London for someone to kind of okay your project. And I still think it's a shame that that hasn't changed. So I don't really have a great experience of the arts and professional and, arts sponsorship and public funding in arts. That's my experience as a musician. And unfortunately, that negative experience is still, I think, is a picture of how things are just now.
Thanks very much, Ricky. Vicky, do you want to set the scene for us?
Yeah, thank you, Elaine. I was lucky enough to be part of, I don't know if you read or in the papers or saw on television, the first 2 days of this week, Monday and Tuesday, there was an international culture summit in this very chamber. And Jonathan Mills from the Edinburgh International Festival and the Scottish Government and the UK Government had invited the kind of ministers of culture from the countries that had been taking part in the Olympics. So 47 countries were sitting here on Monday and Tuesday, represented by culture. There were lots of plenary sessions. And the overriding thing that came out of it for me was two things. One is that a lot of Central Europe wasn't represented apart from Germany. And Germany said that they spend 25% of their overall budget on arts and arts education. Incredible in Germany, and that shows with the work that they do. And then a lot of the other countries were developing countries. So there was sort of Uganda, Poland, South Africa, lots and lots of other different kind of countries. And the thing that came out was there a way that we in the West, with a developed cultural infrastructure, could find a way to support a developing cultural infrastructure in those countries? And they were saying that that was as important for them as us giving them aid for food and for health, because they really knew that if their culture was strong in their countries and they could educate their young people in terms of their own culture, they would become empowered nations, and then they would have a chance. And that was on the hierarchy of needs. That took the wind out of my sails. That really surprised me, because we spend a lot of time saying that it's not right and we're not good enough and things aren't working here, etc., etc. So I realised what a lucky position we were in, and then it made me reflect on the situation at the Edinburgh Festival at the moment. 16,000 Olympians took part in the Olympics. There are 25,000 performers in Edinburgh believing in the arts and culture, and a lot of those are young people. And it made me think about the work that's on by Scottish young artists at the moment. And I don't know how much you followed this, but there are many shows on, and I've been to see in the last 2 days 5 different shows, all of which have won. Herald Angels, Fringe Firsts, are all young Scottish artists under the age of 25, going on stage and telling a story, saying something about their lives. It's the most extraordinary work that's on at the festival. It's part of a revolution that's happening, and it's being led by Scotland, about people taking the stage themselves and feeling that they have the right to do it. And something is really, really shifting, which is very exciting. Now, all of those under 25-year-olds, because we've worked with them in different ways at the National Theatre of Scotland, and I always try to understand where creativity comes from, all of them say that they were inspired by their teachers and were given opportunities at school to begin to think about these things. And those opportunities, those moments changed their lives. And it made me think again about an amazing TED Talk by Plan B. Do you know Plan B? I'm a bit of a fan of Plan B, the London rapper. He's got an amazing album out called Ill Manners. He's an incredible musician, an incredible intellect, actually. And his TED Talk that he gave, he said that as a young person going off the rails, an adult had faith in him and helped him find the light inside himself to become who he is. And he had a plea, and all it was for every adult to take responsibility to set that light alight in one young person. And I think that is the most important thing that we can give, because without that, there is absolutely nothing.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Siobhan.
I suppose I'll start off by saying something pretty obvious. As a singer, I use creativity every day, and I actually feel extremely lucky as a sort of young person. I don't feel that young anymore at 25, to have the chance to do that. And the creativity enables me to take traditional song, contemporary song, and make that my own. It also enables me to write my own music, my own songs. It enables me to work on a regular basis with lots of other talented musicians, young and old. So it's a fabulous thing to have and to be able to use, especially to work with other people. That for me is hugely important. And another thing I'd say is that I've been hugely lucky in that I come from a really creative home. My mum's an artist, my dad's a mathematician and a musician. So creativity was always around my home. And that's really shaped who I am today. And as I was growing up, I realised how special that actually was, because a lot of my friends would come to the house and there would be a guitar being played or a fiddle or a song being sung or some sculpture being made in the front room or the bathtub, whatever. And they were amazed by this. And I started to think, well, why is this not? Why do they not think that this is the norm? And what is the norm? And I suppose that just comes down to exposure. And I'm just lucky that from a really young age I was exposed to our Scottish traditional music and song, and have taken that with me into what I'm doing now. Creativity to me is about not being afraid to explore new things. It's about problem solving. It's about making mistakes, and when we do make the mistakes, finding a positive way to use them in a creative way to get something positive out of that. And again, that comes definitely from my home environment, and always being encouraged to look at it that way. And I'd say, as I was getting older throughout education, I definitely found that in general, the emphasis was towards ticking the boxes, jumping through the hoops, desperately wanting to pass the exams and getting the pieces of paper, which, of course, I would never sit here and say are not important. They are hugely important. But I feel that through that process, often the creative, or the more creative parts of what I enjoyed, what my friends enjoyed, was pushed to one side. And the emphasis often goes to the academic subjects. And I just think it would be lovely to think that we could actually find a way to bring those things together, because, like some of us have said, creativity goes out across all of those subjects. And we can be using the skills from maths, from history, from science, and amongst the skills from music, art, whatever they are. I think that there's a great potential there for joining all those things together. From one of those Ken Robinson talks, he says, Picasso famously said that all children are artists, they're born artists, and it's how we make sure that we nourish those talents and those skills. And it's not about growing out of being an artist, but actually how those skills are allowed to grow with us. And that is often down to an individual who sees a talent in somebody. And I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing if it wasn't for a music teacher that came in my later years at Pennycook High School and encouraged me to think about actually going and doing this as a profession. And I'd just like to quickly leave you with a quote from Gombrich, which I really like and came across whilst having to think about this, because I think that's been another great thing about doing this, is actually having to contemplate what creativity is to us as individuals and what place it has in society. And he says, "We do not know how art began any more than we know how language started. If we take art to mean such activities as building temples and houses, making pictures and sculptures, or weaving patterns, there is no people in all the world without art. If, on the other hand, we mean by art some kind of beautiful luxury, something to enjoy in museums and exhibitions, or something special to use as precious decoration in the best parlour, we must realise that this use of the word is a very recent development, and that in many of the greatest builders, painters, or sculptors of the past never dreamed of it."
Thank you very much, Siobhan. And finally, David.
Good evening, folks. The good thing about coming last is that you're able to steal the best of what you've heard before. And I'd want to start off with what Joan began with, and in a sense what Siobhan finished off with. Because the approach to creativity that I want to suggest to you is a very broad one. And I suppose the starting point of it is that I see creativity as being a fundamental human attribute. It's probably one of the things that makes us human beings rather than any other sentient creatures. And it is an aspect of human development that is very important. It's not always accessible to all individuals for a variety of reasons, but the possibility of unlocking creativity, the creative impulse in everyone, is one that is manifestly valuable. It's valuable on a personal level, it's valuable on a social level, and it's valuable in a whole national level. And if creativity is this very broad, available human resource and attribute, then the key thing is how we find ways of unlocking it. And I think the role of education is a very important one in that. I think it's a fundamental one. And to go back to what Joan said to start with, creativity, it seems to me, is the ability to move outside of the box, the ability to cross-reference, the ability to think in a lateral way, or to act and to work in a lateral way, the ability to bring together apparently unconnected or indeed disconnected things in a way that makes something larger than the whole, or that provides some kind of synthesis. And we view creativity in that way, then it seems to me every human discipline, and I'm not just talking about subjects in school, but every human discipline is amenable to creativity. And so, as was being suggested by our last speaker there, it's not just the world of arts, which are richly represented here tonight, but also the world of sciences, the world of technologies, whether it's new technologies, or the world of the old technologies and engineering and mathematics and so on. And that ability to work creatively is a vitally important one for society and for individuals within society. And within that, I see teachers and educators as having a very important role, because if it is this fundamental human attribute, then it begins at a very early age. And certainly we need to be looking at creativity from 3-year-olds onwards. And I say 3-year-olds because simply that is the time at which they formally enter the education system, and they carry on through until 16 or 18 years. And it interests me to think about how we can begin to tap creative potential in our very youngest children and in the broadest way possible. And I see teachers as educators having a very important role in that, because if creativity is this broad thing, then the professions and the jobs can be creative. And I personally think teaching is an extremely creative profession. Not all practitioners are creative practitioners, but, you know, I'm listening to what some of our previous speakers have said, and they've pointed out the role of inspirational teachers. If a teacher is a good teacher and an inspirational teacher, that man or woman cannot fail to be creative. That's one of the reasons why they're inspirational. They bring creativity to the job that they do. So I'm very interested in seeing ways in which we can provide resources. I mean intellectual resources, emotional resources, and I mean material resources for us to develop the creative skills in the broadest possible way amongst our children and young people in schools, in a way that will benefit them individually, will benefit society collectively, and it will make for the better world that we all want.
Thank you very much, David. That was the bit where our panel had a bit of advance notice and time to think about what they wanted to open up this evening with. Now we come to part of the evening where I'm going to try and get a bit of discussion amongst the panel, and then after that I'll move on to opening up for some discussion amongst yourselves. So I'm going to kick it off, having listened to what everyone said. I'm going to start off by picking up on something that David said at the end, but has also run through what the other members of the panel have said as well. David mentioned things like unlocking creativity, developing creativity. So the question is, can we teach creativity? And I want to ask Siobhan if she could have a think about that first, and then maybe ask the rest of the panel if they want to join in with a debate on that issue.
Like I said, I think, everybody in this room, you're all creative in your own way. I mean, if I was to teach you a song, I won't try and make you all sing, but I believe everybody can sing, actually. I would be teaching you the skills to sing the song. I'd be teaching you the breathing and the phrasing, and I'd be trying to give you all of the techniques that I try to put in place to sing. But what I would actually really be wanting to get out of you is you making that your own, taking what I would be teaching you as a skill, and from there, bringing that from yourself. It's something you've got to, again, it's about not being scared, and it's about having belief in yourself. And if I'm teaching anybody anything, of course I want them to have the basic skills in whatever the area is, but actually it's about giving you the tools to make whatever that is your own.
Anybody else want to comment on what Siobhan said?
I think that's interesting, sort of I think that it's I don't like saying creativity can be taught, but I certainly think you can foster the attributes, that you can foster the component parts of creativity, and it's that business of allowing that voice, like Siobhan's talking about, teaching the knowledge bit. She can give you the actual knowledge of how to make this kind of music or how to sing in this particular way, but the creativity bit comes beyond that and what you do with that. And it's those skills, I think, around that you can foster. And the best way of doing that is being a role model, being an example, being the thing and illustrating it through your own work.
Back to the one adult issue, maybe, Vicky, that you mentioned.
Yeah, I think as well that there's something very much within all of this, I totally agree, about encouragement and about not allowing barriers to come up that inhibit that creativity. Because, using your brilliant quote from Picasso, you can see with the little children that they have no inhibition to do with their creativity because they don't define themselves in any way. And then once we start to become aware of society and different things, that those inhibitors start. And I think that's a really critical time about going, trying to find what the thing is that those children are passionate about and enabling them to kind of grow in that direction. So I think that encouragement and stopping those barriers is really vital. I don't think we know how to do that properly.
I think we're quite scared of it sometimes
Yeah.
too. And picking up on what David said earlier too about, you started with the 3-year-olds entering the educational system, but actually, the 0 to 3 are the most creative beings on the planet and the best learning machines on the planet. And then these barriers, mostly imposed by adults, start to get in the way. So it's not just about unlocking and supporting the development of those creative attributes. It's about not putting up those barriers in the first place and actually learning from them. They've got it. And then, certainly in the past it's been the case that the education system's been very good at stomping it out. And so it's how do we get those supportive mechanisms into that education system?
So, David, education's been good at stomping it out?
A bit louder, Elaine, sorry.
Sorry, I'm saying education's been good at stomping out creativity. How would you respond to that?
Well, I suppose I remember reading somewhere Willie McIlvanney, the Scottish novelist, said that famously when he went to Glasgow University, I took acres of fertile ignorance and they poured concrete on it. And that was a reflection of his university education. And, there will be, these experiences will be there. All of us have them. I've had them at school. They're also matched with experiences it is rare to meet somebody who's not been moved by something within their education, sometimes to the extent that it has changed their lives And there are few things that do give us in that life-changing way, and education can do that. Good education can do that. We don't want to look at it through rose-tinted spectacles, and manifestly all education isn't like that. There's some that will be stultifying, but in a sense, one of the jobs that we have as teachers, and that GTC has, I suppose, with other agencies in Scottish education, is to make our teachers, to encourage our teachers to be as creative as possible, because, as the other panellists are suggesting, it's providing the circumstances in which creativity can flourish. I think sometimes that is by direct teaching, sometimes it's by example, and sometimes it's providing these resources in the broadest sense of the term that will allow young people to find the areas in which they can be creative.
Which I suppose then brings us to the point whether or not in Scotland creativity is given enough recognition and support, which is something that Ricky mentioned at the beginning about having to go to London. So I don't know if you want to expand a bit further on that.
Well, that's a whole, that is a whole discussion in itself. But just carrying on from the schools one for a second, I was quite trying to find very positive examples from school to start in a kind of amicable way. But we can all find negative ones, and if it can't be taught, it can certainly be hindered. There's absolutely no doubt about that. It can certainly, my experience of school was that, the curriculum that I got was anything but the things that I loved. Music, drama, art, painting. Were things, for example, in our curriculum in the school that I went to, you weren't allowed to do any of these things until you'd got your, O grades properly. So I think that has definitely changed. But one of the things I was got quite excited about over the last few years was this idea about the curriculum for excellence. And when I heard these words, I thought, well, that's a really, I don't know where this has gone, but when I heard the words, I just thought it was a great idea, because one of the most dispiriting things as a parent I witnessed was, and this is a school that was, I think, probably imploding at the time, but it was as a parent, I was sitting watching a kind of Christmas concert where kids were being wheeled up onto the stage and asked to do things which they hadn't been rehearsed for. They were performing really badly. And then the teachers were going, that wasn't that great. And I was thinking, no, it was terrible. It was terrible on every level. It was terrible because you haven't prepared them for it. They're getting up there and giving something which is about 20% of what they can give. And now you're asking us to clap it. And I think the mediocre is really, really, we've got to kind of stamp down on that. And my God, if anything has inspired people, presumably over the last month, must be the Olympics. And so, if you can look at that model, and one of the most inspiring interviews I had at the Olympics was I can't remember his name, someone will help me here, but the man who manages or trains the cycling team. And he talked about how his model for excellence really could be brought into any model of life. And I thought, what a brilliant thing to hear. Wouldn't it be great to hear that in the arts? But I think so often kids are put up for things and they're not prepared for them, and they could do so much better. So I think excellence is really, really important. And, Vicky will tell you, I'm sure, to work with kids, and I've worked in an amateur, I've been done passion plays at the church and school plays. You can get brilliant things out of kids. You can get things that you'd never get out of adults. So I think excellence is to be admired.
Mm-hmm. But is it all just about schools, just something you said there? Do communities have a big input as well? For example, and I'm being parochial here, but in Coatbridge there's a fabulous new community choir called Sensational, and they are working with anybody in the community. So how do you feel about
I think excellence is just I think it's got to start somewhere. So presumably it has to start with young children, but you have to get that into, you have to get that into a mindset. You have to be quite ambitious, I think. And I often, because I'm doing this reflection thing about people saying, what was it like 25 years ago? One of the things I reflect on a lot is the fact that when I was young, you never considered the odds of making it. I don't know if everyone else was the same, but when you're young, you just go, nah, all the Bob Dylan, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, no, they need me. You know what I mean? That's the way you think. You think, there's this fantastic canon of pop music out there. No, they still need me. That's the way you've got to think. That's the way Vicky's got to think. You guys have got to think as well. There's a great canon of folk music out there. No, they need Siobhan. That's the way you have to kind of approach. And you don't think, well, the chances of that happening are 1 in 100. You just do it. Because that's the way that you know, the way that you're set. And I think we've still got to push people to do that.
Can I just pick up
Of course,
sorry, Ellen, about the kind of collective responsibility for that? Because you asked, in terms of what Ricky was saying about whether it is just schools' responsibility. And I think it can't just be schools' responsibility. The thing is, however, they're a captive audience while they're at school because they have to go, the young people. And it's a place where there is a modicum of control in terms of being able to influence them positively and negatively. But I think a healthy society, that whole society would take responsibility for that. And I know, you know, for us, the National Theatre of Scotland, our work with young people has been absolutely at the centre. When I started, I thought, you know, what would a successful National Theatre of Scotland look like? And it's not just that everybody's seen shows, it's that somebody's grandchild was part of a participation event, and, you know, we did an amazing project in Orkney, in Kirkwall High School, which transformed the way the National Theatre of Scotland thought about what we were. And it was, you know, and the school was amazing, but we didn't do it through the school. We just found them at the school, the young people, and tried to do something which is kind of setting that light. So I think we have a collective responsibility outside just that formal education sphere to find ways to inspire and educate them.
David, did you want to?
Yes, just I was going to mention that the show was called Mixter Maxter, and it showed that what can be done when you bring resources, the resources of the professionalism and the years of experience of the National Theatre for Scotland into an environment that didn't have that, although we've got a rich dramatic tradition in the school. But one of the key characteristics of that thing was it involved the whole of what was the third year at that time. So it was all 14-year-olds. And, you know, there were shining stars of the type that Ricky's talking about, but there were some pretty surly bairns there as well, you know. But the great thing about it was it transfixed them. I can't tell you. It brought them all together, and, you know, it changed their lives. It was a remarkable thing. And it was drama, and it was installation art as well, and they were all involved in it. It was getting that level, that sort of very large-scale collective engagement that was quite remarkable about it, and that's because there were particular resources put into that. It's an indication that you really can involve people and you can engage them in that way with imagination, with ambition, you know, and I know National Theatre has repeated that in remarkably different ways elsewhere in the country.
Thanks very much. I think at this point the audience have come along because they're very interested in the issue and listening to the panel. So I think we'll turn now to ask our audience if they want to join in the discussion. And if you do, could you please raise your hand and keep it raised until a microphone is either passed to you or the light comes on and a microphone in front of you at a desk nearest to you. I think probably everyone will have access to a microphone on the desks, but if not, there's floating microphones as well. And I think if we can keep our questions or points brief, if you're asking a question, you want someone in particular to answer it, then please indicate that. But if you just want to make a point, which we can come back to the panel with later, then please feel free to do that as well. So can I invite audience participation? Must be someone. Yes, well, I've got to the back first. If you could also tell us your name.
Hi, I'm Elspeth Huff, and I'm here on behalf of Promote Youth Theatre Scotland, which is supported by Creative Scotland and works in very much the same...
Sorry, could I stop you a moment? It's
yes.
not very loud.
Not very loud? Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes, that's
okay.
grand, thanks.
I'm here on behalf of Promote Youth Theatre Scotland, which is supported by Creative Scotland and works closely with National Theatre of Scotland. I was just reflecting on what came out of the panel discussion about the importance of questioning for creativity. And I just kind of wanted to ask the panel as a whole, what more could be done to encourage young people to question? You can do it in schools, you can do it throughout the community. We recently held a National Festival of Youth Theatre, and what struck me was not just the performances, but the difficult questions young people were asking about, things that I think many adults aren't having conversations about. And it strikes me that if we want people to be creative, we need to foster the culture you were talking about, and especially ensure that people are encouraged to question and not squashed. So I guess the question for the panel is, what more can we do about that?
Okay, does anyone want to jump in and respond? David, everyone's looking at you.
No, they're only looking at me to see if I heard what was said. That was all. They're not looking at me for an answer. I'll let somebody else start off the line.
John's going to jump in with an answer here.
Because I totally agree. I think that's a really, really important point, and it is one of those, that part of that skill set, that challenging of assumptions and that ability to ask the difficult questions. And you're dead right, young people are really, really good at it. But again, it's one of those things that traditionally the education system has not been terribly good at fostering. Because really, you know, long ago, I'm talking here now, you know, you were supposed to sit there and learn. You weren't supposed to challenge or ask. And that's actually partly because it was much more about, education was much more about knowledge transfer. It was about learning stuff and learning facts. And it's one of the things that I really welcome in Curriculum for Excellence, is this much more balance between knowledge and development of skills. And I think that questioning and the ability to think and analyse is really, really one of the most important ones. And if you're all teachers, you're probably all quite familiar with these higher order thinking skills. And there is this lovely taxonomy of higher order thinking skills. I won't remember them all, but I do remember that knowledge and understanding is at the bottom and creativity is at the top. And one of the questions that I have is that if knowledge and understanding are the lowest of the higher order thinking skills and creativity is at the top, why are exams still focused on the bottom end of that scale? And if we're serious about higher order thinking skills being important, then we need to find a way of bringing that into the exam system so that it reflects those skills.
Thanks very much, Joan. I'm going to go to the front now, and then I'll be going back to the back in a moment. If you could wait till the microphone. Oh, are we not using the desk mics?
It's on there.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful too, because it's louder. The desk microphones are louder, and it's quite difficult to hear at the front.
So should I move?
That would be good. Well,
can you hear me now, Mother?
You could use both if you want. That's fine.
I'm Nancy Nicholson, 22 years a primary school teacher, 5, 6 and 7-year-olds, then education officer at the Glasgow Royal Concert Hall. And I've been on many committees and things for the EIS, and we've tried ourselves in knots trying to do this. But you know how many things are easier said than done? In some ways, this is easier done than said. With Ricky for saying that creativity is hard to teach, but very easy to stamp out. Cave people were creative. They had no tick boxes or education committees or anything, and they still manage it. Please stop hitting the education system. They're only doing what those who order them say you have to have all the tick boxes done. When I was a teacher, I was scolded for taking a class of 33 5-year-olds out to roll in the snow when we had a field of virgin snow one morning. And the Heidi was shouting at the infant misters, "What on earth's Nancy doing?" He'd spent the entire afternoon the day before teaching us about the new 5 to 14 environmental studies. And what was Nancy doing taking out? Trust the teachers. Trust the children. They are artists before they come to school. Make time for doing nothing, which is time for thinking and creating. And try to take it from the easy way. I know we have to do the tick boxes. We need all your wonderful organisations. But let the bairns play. True play, not with machines and things and technology. Go out, muck about and play, and you'll see creativity flourish.
Thank you very much. Sam, do you want to comment on that? Okay. Could I see some more hands? I think there's someone at the back with a microphone. Is that correct? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Andrew McPeak, and I'm an English teacher at Craigmount High School. There is a great deal of consensus in this discussion, but that leaves me wondering, how will that consensus stand up when we consider how we promote creativity given the current economic context? It would strike me from afar that right now we are burdened with a political class who are creative only in their accounting, only in the way in which they can figure out cuts for schools, and for classroom teachers who year on year see their budgets shrinking, see measures imposed on them which they are not welcoming, see their terms and conditions eviscerated, see their pay packets shrink. How are we to promote creativity? We talked about inspirational teachers. Now, I'm someone who teaches at the high school they went to. I was inspired by my teachers, and I'm sat next to a drama teacher who was also a pupil at the high school they teach at. Now, when we went to the school had a fully functioning drama theatre. Doesn't have that anymore. The young men next to me do not benefit from that. Furthermore, I know local authorities in Scotland that have more schools than they have drama teachers. How does that promote creativity? So my question is, we agree in this room about what needs to be done. How do we do that in the current economic context?
Okay, anyone want to try and address that issue, Ricky?
I don't want to address that issue. I have no idea how you address that issue, but let me just put another point, which I think is a well-made point, and it's one that I hear teachers say a lot. But also, in the mix of that has to come, as a parent of, well, 3 of my children range from 17 to 24, and it's a terrible time for young people. I think it's a terrible time to be a young person. And I mean, I've reflected on this with lots of pals and lots of relations. I think it is a rotten time to be a young person coming out of school or coming out of university even, or just trying to make a living. I mean, if you try to buy a house, if you try to find a job, if you try to, lots and lots of things that we would have expected to do quite easily. I think it's a rotten time. So I think that has to be in the mix of things as well. And I think that it feels a bad thing to constantly be saying this. But I wonder what effect that is having on young people to be saying it's such a bad time. But I think it has to be put in as well into what you're saying. Sorry to make it so negative.
I think part of the tyranny of the economic recession, apart from the kind of tangible things about, reduced wages, and all of the kind of terrible kind of life things that are going along with that, I think the tyranny of the recession is that it makes us obsess about economics. And inevitably, because it's affecting our daily lives, and we can't help that. But actually, the things that we're talking about are philosophical. And what we need to find is the space for us to allow ourselves to be philosophical about what culture and what creativity are, because it's not just about an economic fact. And I, know, God, my granny used to say, what was it? Money goes out the door and love flies out the window. It's really hard when money comes into the thing to think about the greater things that we want to achieve. But I think we have to carve out the space for us to be able to think about creativity as a human act and not a monetary one. David? Naive, I know.
I agree. I agree with what the speaker said there. There is no doubt that at times of economic recession, then budgets like education will be cut, and that will have consequences. It will have consequences for the quality of education. It will reinforce the notion that there are frills and extras that can be cut. Many of the people sitting at the front here work in trades and professions that will suffer from that, and as a result, our children in schools will suffer from that. I think as well, from the point of view of speaking of the General Teaching Council, our concerns for the professionalism of teachers. The more professional, the more highly qualified and highly professional we can have our teachers, then we think the better quality of education will exist in schools. And there is a danger at times like this that there will be a move away from that. I think we can see what's happened in Glasgow over the court ruling, where it will now be possible for non-teachers, for there to be no nursery teacher in nursery schools in Glasgow. We would see that as being a retrograde step, because we would have to ask the question, how do you ensure that these very young children are getting the quality of education that is required? Because all the research evidence shows that the more professional, the better qualified as teachers in nursery schools, then the better the education is. And I think that's quite central too. The answer to it, well, it lies in your hands and the collective hands of your colleagues. Because one person saying it will not make any difference, 2 people saying it won't make any difference. If a whole school is saying it, that will begin to make a difference. And if a whole country is saying it, then that will make a very big difference. I unashamedly believe in the power and the efficacy of collective action, and I think that's one way of doing it. But I think there are very important professional questions that we can address within the context of tonight's debate as well.
Thanks, David. Can I see a show of hands again, just so we get an idea of how many other folk? I'm going to go over to the other side of the room, please. Yes, that's great. Your microphone's on. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yeah. My name's Rosa Murray. I'm a teacher, but I work as an education advisor with the General Teaching Council. I wanted to ask the panel this, that in a sense, if we live in a society where creativity is not unleashed, fostered, developed, it's actually quite dangerous. Because I think when I'm looking at the other side of it, when we see a lot of disaffected youth, and we also see people, adults who end up perhaps into prison, we often find transformation can happen for other ways of living and being when creativity is fostered. And that people get in touch with what they have inside them and in a much more creative and often beautiful, poetic way or artistic way can express themselves. So I suppose what I'm asking is, do you think a society that doesn't foster and develop this from the very early years and right through, it's quite a dangerous society?
Siobhan, do you want to address that?
I definitely agree with you, and I would say that the other thing that has already happened is that we are a passive society. At a click of a button, we have absolutely everything that we need. And on one hand, that is absolutely fabulous because the influences now that we have from all over the world is a wonderful thing. And that's what creativity is all about as well. It's about bringing all those things together. But yeah, I mean, take Hogmanay, for example. That would have been about first footing and doing your party piece, singing your song. And now, you know, we expect to be entertained. And my generation, that is what we look for, rather than maybe even having ever experienced the value and the worth and the joy that you get from actually creating your own entertainment for yourself, whatever that is. I don't know if anybody heard the interview this morning on the radio about the survey that they've done about kids and about them asking them, you know, would you rather be out on your bike or out there making a mess, playing, climbing a tree, building a dam, or having the fancy holiday in the computer game? And actually, the answer was that they would much rather be out there making a mess and being encouraged to create.
Rolling in the snow.
Aye.
Anyone else want to comment?
Yeah, could I just say something there? Going back to the point the previous gentleman made about the resources and cutting of resources and those kind of dangers. Clearly, we would always want more resources for the arts and education and arts in schools, clearly. But I think there's something that I wouldn't like to see happen, and that is that we have a fight for more resources that ends up in the same paradigm as we were, because I think that needs to change. You know, I think it needs to be something else. More resources, yes, absolutely. But I personally wouldn't be fighting for the same as we had, or even just more of the same as we had. I would want things to be continually changing and thinking about doing things differently to encourage more.
What was it we had out of interest?
What did you not like? For example, the gentleman said that there was a good drama studio, I think you said, in the school when you first joined, and that isn't there anymore. Uh-huh. That's awful. That's a shame. And clearly, I would like to see more drama studios, but that's not all I want to see. Yeah. I want to see, you know, there is something philosophical and fundamental that needs to shift, which is around not just focusing on this knowledge transfer, but on the knowledge and skills. And then the other thing that struck me is the lady that said about playing in the snow and the low-tech things and the taking time. One of the most beautiful projects that I've seen in recent years was actually a visual arts project. And what that was, it was a professional visual artist was going into schools, this was on the Isle of Skye, and spending, I think it was 2 hours a week, taking the kids outside, rain, snow or shine, to look and to draw. And the quality of the work that they produced after a term was absolutely incredible. So, you know, we just need to remember that balance and not get too involved and hung up about the money side of things.
It's interesting as well because it's also about measurement, isn't it? And it's about exam results and that kind of thing, about everybody being accountable. And I say something which is often quite unpopular, especially with my mum and dad. Like, I'm only sort of 14 again. But at the National Theatre of Scotland, so we employ 35 full-time members of staff, and at any one time we have we employ over 500 people, 600 people a year, freelancers. And we have all these different shows on the road and everything. And we come into a lot of schools and do a lot of kind of careers talks about opportunities at the National Theatre of Scotland, not just being an actor. And one of the things that I always say is, you could do any single job at the National Theatre of Scotland without any formal education, apart from one, and that's our head of finance, who's an accountant. Nobody else needs to have any formal education at all to do what we do, to be part of the creativity in any area at all. And I think it's really, that's not to denigrate remotely formal education, but I think it's really important for people to know that it's not just about pursuing that kind of exam thing.
That's, fun enough, a conversation that I had with someone a few weeks ago. I was in London and bumped into an old friend of mine who's now the head of Sony Music Worldwide. So he's kind of one of these people that he was an A&R guy, and he's one of the good guys in our business, I happen to think. But he is the head of Sony, so one week he's dealing with, Bruce Springsteen, and the other week he's, dealing with Beyonce. So he kind of knows what he's talking about. And Lorraine, my wife, said to him, Rob, what do you look for when you're employing people? He said, all I look for is people who love music, and they love music right the way through, and I don't want any sort of music degree. Sorry, that's a whole other subject we can talk about. I don't want any music degree, music business degree. I just want people who love music. And kind of being what Vicky just said, I think that's true. It's still important to remember that you've just got to allow kids to have a passion for things. And we were talking earlier, just through in the green room there, about kids who just don't fit into the system. And sometimes it's really important to allow these kids just to, going back to what I was saying about the music room in that school I taught in, because the playground was a pretty rough place, just becoming a sanctuary for them. And it was really important for these guys just to have that and just to allow that to happen.
Unbelievably, we're running out of time. So I can only take maybe a couple of quick questions. Gentleman here's been waiting, and I'll take the other two, and I'm afraid we'll have to stop there.
Thank you. Habib Malik from Islamic Relief, somebody who works with young people a lot here in Scotland and abroad in many countries. I find working in the poor countries with poor children, they are more creative than our young people here. I think what's missing here in this country is creativity, I believe, is one side of the coin, but the other side is innovation, the doing game. We may be very creative, but where it stops, what I think our young people here in this country are finding difficult, or there's just too many obstructions for them to do. Whereas in poor countries, I find the young, some of the toys I see them, they make themselves. And I say, wow, did you make that? And it's just, there's more opportunities. The doing game is missing, the innovation side. So we may, our young people, I think maybe the life is so easy for young people in this country, whereas in some of the poor countries where I've come across, the life is so tough. They constantly thinking about creative ideas, how to make it a bit easy.
All right, we'll hold that just now. Can I have yourself in the middle, and then final question?
I'm Jasmine Yizhong from China and based in London and Beijing. I'm a musician and a cultural promoter. My question is, when we talk about the development of creativity for young children and young people, we naturally think about music, because music is one of the very early way and natural ways to let people to communicate and to share their things in a creative and a harmonious way. But nowadays, in the modern society, we talk about the protection of people's creative ideas. So we talk about intellectual property protection. So when we try to teach the young people to join the process of developing their creativity, how should we fine-tune and juggle between the protection area and also the sharing sense of the creativity?
So that ties in with the previous issue about innovation. And finally, could you make your point?
Thursday Sanderson from Drake Music Scotland. Just going back to some of the things we were talking about the system, and the school system. I saw an A-level pupil today or yesterday on the news opening her results, talking about how she's been working 10 hours a day. And I just think whether there is a kind of mismatch between what the education system is telling young people they should be aspiring to, and some, the things we were talking about here, and I think we're all in agreement that, creativity and culture is very important, and we want to foster these things. But I was reminded, because I was looking today on Facebook, talking about using technology, and was looking at somebody talking about the top 5 regrets of people before they die. And they were that I worked so hard, I wish I hadn't worked so hard, that I'd been true to my real self, that I'd kept up those golden friendships, and that I'd followed my dreams. That's 4 of them, I can't remember the other one.
You've probably got time for the other one anyway.
Yeah, that kind of tells us
you.
something about the values in life.
Okay, thanks. A brief word from the panel on those issues, because I think we've got to be quite tight for time now. Vicky?
I think that, in terms of your question about intellectual property and protection, I think that's a red herring in terms of young people and creativity. I think those kind of laws and those kind of restrictions are things that grown-ups have to think about and get limited by. And I think that young people shouldn't ever even have to think about stuff like that. So I would want to remove any of those as a kind of potential barrier, I would
What
think.
about the issue in poorer countries, or that was raised that children seem to then be more inventive, maybe? Is that something that anyone wants to comment on?
I don't think we need to set one against the other. I mean, that is a reflection of the material requirements in that country, and I think it's an indication that creativity will find a way out through innovation. I don't say that in any sort of sentimentalised way, but I don't think we need to be stripping ourselves back to ensure that we can get our young people to innovate and be creative. We need to find ways within our society, within the material resources of our society, where we can encourage children to be creative in that way. And a slightly wider point, again, similarly, I don't think we should be setting formal curricular areas against the informalities of it. I think we need to find ways of opening these things up as much as possible, because young people and children of all ages, they will be creative in many different types of ways, and I think we need to understand that and be open to that, not provide barriers, but to find ways of positively supporting it through the formal education system and also through the informal curriculum, either during the day in school or outside of school.
Well, I think that's a really good point to end on, because I'm afraid we have to finish. We could be here for another hour, clearly, and I apologise to anyone in the audience who didn't get to contribute and wanted to. I want to thank our panellists, who were Joan Parr, Ricky Ross, Vicky Featherston, Siobhan Miller and David Drever, and I would ask you to kindly join with me in thanking them for what has been an excellent discussion on the talent of our young people.
Council of Scotland thank Elaine Smith, the Deputy Presiding Officer, for so ably chairing and introducing this event, but also, of course, for the Parliament and hosting it. It's very special for us to be able to come in here and sit in the seats that are normally the bear pit for the politicians to sit in. But it's called Politics, Culture and Creativity. And thank you to Elaine for the job that she's done, and thank you to the Parliament for hosting and facilitating tonight's event. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.